Hi there, Vibe Gardeners. Welcome to another episode of Vibe Gardening from Edition. We're going to talk about what I'm going to upgrade from last year. Because I talked about a lot of my equipment last year, and this year I'm going to take my lessons learned and apply it to upgrades. With that said, let's go. So this year, the main two category of upgrade I'm going to be doing in comparison to last year are going to be irrigation and structural support for my plants. So if you guys remembered from last year, we talked about actually my second was it one of my first 5 videos. I talked about making a trellis system, and then later on, I talked about having a preparing for vacation in the summer with your garden. So I'm going to go into how I'm going to upgrade my irrigation system for any kind of vacation, and also sort of a hands-off approach to gardening a little bit. Of course, there will be plenty of hands-on, but this will get your water at the right timing for your plants at the right time. So, and also the trellis system, I'm going to talk about how I'm going to try out an upgrade that's more sustainable and more modular this year. So, with that said, guys, here we go. So with irrigation, let's go into a little bit about a recap of what happened. So if you remember this episode right here, where I talked about in my irrigation system with my automated technique of being able to do the timer for the watering. I'm going to talk about that first. And so this is what we used last year. So if this is a timer system with a Wi-Fi connectivity here that can connect with this, which is going to be indoors in my living room, feeding into the hose where this thing is connected. This actually worked pretty well, and I'm going to admit that there is actually nothing to be desired of on this, except that the first main thing is that it used the Tuya framework of smart home applications. And being a Chinese hosted application, there are some privacy and data concerns that I'm not going to go into this channel. You can find out plenty on your own with a little research. But the main thing is that, yeah, like it doesn't actually hurt me that much because it kind of just needs a general ballpark of where you are. And the only data it's going to get is really like how often I'm watering my plants, which frankly isn't that scary to have someone know about. So I'm not too concerned about that. But the one thing that I am very concerned about is the fact that it doesn't actually handle weather um, very well, in that it's supposed to be able to detect weather from local forecasts, which it gets the forecast just fine, but it doesn't actually use it properly in timing way the water is watered, which I'll give it to them. It is hard to determine what that actually means, right? Because even with the forecast, especially in the summer, we can see that the percentage of the forecasted rain is like 20 to 30%. It's still going to rain sometimes it doesn't rain. So what if it gets wrong, right? And then it skips watering when it needs water badly. And that's something that we have to take into account with these type of things. So I don't want to depend on that anyway. And the other thing is that it never caused me a problem, but this receiver here inside the house, I'm going to put this up against my microphone over here. I don't know if you guys hear that, but there is a lot of jingling going on here. And that does not um, bode confidence in me. So I decided that instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to link both below, because this does work, by the way, and it is cheaper for more functionality. But I went for the main brand. I got this online because it is actually one of the best reputable brand out there. It is the Beehive Orbit, and so I'm going to try this year. It's Bluetooth controlled, so it does have an app for programming it, but it does not have Wi-Fi connectivity. Because I'm figuring kind of like my hydroponic equipment, which I'm kind of thinking if I'm not here to fix it in person, what good does it do, right? And also, I can't really monitor the water or the rainfall here anyway if I'm away, which I really need for away modifications. So it doesn't really matter. So that's why I'm going to try this main brand that I'm going to, the Orbit Beehive. I'm going to see how this works out. I got a 4-channel Bluetooth, so I think it's going to be a good upgrade here. So the second portion of irrigation I want to talk about are the hoses, because last season, if you remember the bugs. You guys remember from the episode on vacation, gardening while vacationing? We talked about Soaker hose and where it uses a defect within the design to generate a drip effect on the hose. That worked out pretty well for me. But the one thing that I've noticed is that like that metal garden, that was fine. All the garden were fine except for my in-ground tomato garden, which required a long length soaker hose. And what happened is that I noticed the pressure near the end was dying down significantly faster, and it created blossom end rot. What blossom end rot is that the where the flower is still attached to the tomato, it started looking this dark, rotting look on it. And even though it's still edible up to that point of blossom end rot, it is really created by actually calcium deficiency. But scientifically speaking, most soil in most places, there's no calcium deficiency. So the real actual culprit of blossom end rot is actually underwatering, which it really shows at the end of the hose what happened was the pressure got low enough, became a problem. And I thought about it a little bit, and so I got this hose here, which is that a product right there. I'll link below for you guys. This is a soaker hose that actually the soaker hose that I had before, what it does that every time water goes through, it'll actually expand like a fabric tube would, and then it will leak through the seams. Whereas with this doesn't expand at all. And what happens is that right around the white part of this hose, it would actually spray out water. So it doesn't actually depend on the expansion and contraction of a hose to operate. And with that, I feel like it's going to give me less dependency on hydraulic pressure on the hose, giving it a little more uniformity. So we'll see how that works. I don't know if it's going to work, but definitely for me, one of the main things, I'm going to double up the coverage at the end of it to make sure that I'm getting enough water coming through it. All right, so the next topic we're going to talk about is support system for the tomatoes and also zucchini. So this actually is something that last year I talked plenty about trellising with the tomatoes. And if you remember, this is the trellis that I had. It's about, I think, 4 to 5 feet tall. And it worked pretty well, though it did have some support issues. That actually never had support issues. Basically, it leaned at one point, where I was able to fix that with some engineering on some shovel handle that fell off. So I really think this is going to be still good. But the other thing too is this year I have 3 extra tomato plants that I need to trellis. So what I've done was I found these connectors from Amazon. What they do is they can take these rods here. These are 6-foot rods that I was able to get at Menards. And what you can essentially do with them is you can essentially snap these in and create your own trellis from these plastic covered steel rods. You can see here, they're connected now, right? So what I can do is basically I can do a triangulation system where I have 3 rods, and I'll be able to essentially connect them up to do a prism-shaped trellis system with it. And that'll make it significantly more flexible in what I can do with these. And also I can basically make it stronger if I need to. And basically be able to create trellis for whatever I want. And the price is also significantly better in that I was able to get about 100 of these connectors for about, this is 2026, I was able to get it for about $25. And each one of these poles is less than $2. So I think it's actually a very cost-effective way of getting yourself some very sturdy trellises. So last year, another thing I didn't document very well are these fence posts. So I got these metal fence posts, these steel ones that are coated. That's meant for cattle fence or whatever it is. I was able to basically use it as a way of basically tying zucchini up or summer squash up to them to basically help them grow. And it's one of the techniques that I think is a hidden treasure. If we zoom in, we can see that at the bottom, it's significantly close to each one of the zucchinis. And what I can do is as this thing grows up in here, I'll tie them up to this post. which is very sturdy right now. It's not really moving. As you can see with my hand, it's not really moving. So what we can do here is that this is the way it's going to give it good air to basically reduce the risk of mildew and powdery mildew. And then as it grows up, we can actually start cutting off the leaves at the bottom. That's not contributing to making fruit and going to make it grow better, which I'll talk about in probably later this summer as well. But this fencing here is good. And the one thing for sure is I made sure here at the bottom, I was able to get the fan here under the wood so that if this becomes a structural problem, I can either use nail or screw and basically use a washer and basically pin this up against the raised bed if I have to. All right, to give you guys a bit of idea of what's going on here. So this is the final look of what it will be. I only put up about one of each trellis. And then on the surface level, I put down the soaker hose. And as usual, I will be putting these into the mulch to give it some UV protection from the sun. As you can see, I doubled or tripled up the wrapping at the end, because knowing the lack of water is going to come through, and that new release of water should give it more pressure at the end. And as you can see from the trellis, this is right here, this is the old one, and here's the new one. As you can see, it is significantly taller, and I was able to put more cross-section support along the way, and that should give me a little bit of better flexibility for how the tomato grows. Though I do feel like I might have maybe needed 4 poles to do this. I'm not sure, but I think this is good enough to try for this season and see how that goes. But as needed, I'll probably have more poles and be able to get more supporting arms out here to give it all kinds of interesting looks. But we'll see how that works out. Alright guys, so now that you got an idea of what I've been doing for upgrade this year, you'll see what I learned from last year with my setup. So to sum up a little bit, soaker hose stays in all the other raised bed, as we saw with the way that it actually worked out pretty well last year. The main thing I did was I put in that rubber, flat soaker hose style, one that will not expand and contract as water pressure changes. I also upgraded my smart timer to actually be that of Bluetooth and more durable build than the Wi-Fi and slightly weaker build, though there's nothing wrong with it, so I'll still link both below. And also, instead of using the old trellis system, what I did was I used the generic 6-foot rod, and I used these arms here to be able to make my own DIY trellis. And also, I showed you for first time how I used steel fence post to be able to support zucchinis as they grow. So hopefully that gave you guys an idea of how you can do that at home. If you got better ideas than I do, please comment below. And as always, subscribe for more content like this. And until next time, guys, keep gardening and keep vibing. Let's go.